Logistics is one of those things you might not think about too often. You don't really feel how important it is until your city starts choking on traffic and unemployment at the same time. Previously, we laid down the highways, but right now they're not actually doing much work. So let's change that. If this area isn't built properly, heavy industry will break the local roads, traffic will bottleneck, and the whole thing will grind to a halt before it started. So today, I'm going to be building a realistic Dutch-style industrial district, new local roads, expanded rail, proper bike and pedestrian connections, and an industrial layout that actually makes sense. The goal's simple: make this look like something you'd see in the Netherlands, keep it functional under very heavy traffic, and finally start bringing that unemployment number down. In the last episode, I spent some time creating an area to produce raw materials for industry to process. Now I want to take those resources, transport them to nearby industry, and get working on producing new goods for the city and for export. So with all of that out of the way, let's get cracking on with doing what is probably the most important part of the actual build itself, and that's laying down the foundations and the layout to get things moving and keep it moving as we build out the area. Now the build area itself will be on the left hand side of this particular highway. You'll see me doing a little bit of prep work on the right hand side here, and that's really just making sure that everything's going to make sense for future episodes. Much like the polder that we created in the last episodes with the agriculture and the farm, the actual elevation of the land here is just a little bit too high for what I would like. Now there were a few comments on the last episode by you Dutchies pointing out that the polders are in fact not underwater or not under water height. Frankly, I'm just terrified to build anything under the waterline in this game. I just won't do it. I'm terrified of flooding the damn place, so I'll get it as close to the waterline as I can, but I will not be going under it, there's no chance. Also, I have heard you guys loud and clear there should not be vegetation on the dikes, so that will go off camera. I'll make sure that they are gone. I would very much like to have something on there, some type of vegetation. I think long grass somebody had mentioned that you might find, but unfortunately we just don't have that in the game as a vanilla asset or a custom asset yet, so hopefully maybe, you never know, somebody might be working on that. I think one of the assets that I miss most from City Skylines 1 was the little grass asset that you could put in, and really you could just hide all sorts of jankiness with it. You know, you'd put it almost on every corner and it gave you a real nice default overgrowth effect, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It was really nice, and I do miss it, I have to say. But I'm not here to talk about grass, we are cracking on with our layout. So the plan here really is just to create a little bit of a couplet system or a dual carriageway, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to be taking highway roads and I am basically going to be making local roads out of them. What I will be doing is jumping into Road Builder and just changing the speed limit on it. I want to slow things down, but also I don't want traffic that we're going to have here using it as a shortcut or a rat run. I want them to go on the highway when they need to go on the highway and not kind of take shortcuts. And the two interchanges that we have here, we have one direct, which is our parklow there, and then obviously we have one off to the right hand side of this camera shot. I very much want that other interchange to be servicing all of the buildings on that part of the map. I don't want people coming off the interchange or coming off the highway early and then coming in, cutting through and really just adding to the traffic. So slowing the traffic down hopefully should, fingers crossed, make sure that that doesn't happen. I will keep things moving, but I think when I reduced the speed, I reduced it from 120 kilometers per hour down to 60. So I'm hoping by halving the speed, that should hopefully give us the desired effect. So really, here's the first view of the sort of basic layout that we're going to have. Obviously, we're going to continue expanding this out. Next thing up is to give it a little bit more connectivity. I'm going to create a number of junctions. We're going to use a little roundabout trick here just so we have a single point where people can enter and exit the network. Depending on how much traffic I think is going to be in any particular area, I might or might not create a roundabout. We'll have a look and see if it's necessary. It's something we can always come back to and adjust if we need to later on. I will be leaving a little bit of space around the junctions, so if I need to rework stuff, then we still have that opportunity without having to make too many amendments. Now the nice thing about building in this particular area is, of course, we are sort of penned in by the water on one side, and then on either side of the actual build development area for today, we do have interchanges ready, service interchanges ready to take stuff on and off the highway. So I can be pretty confident once we have everything built in here that we're not going to be having any more extra traffic, to worry about or to deal with. And once things are down and set, we should be good to go, and we can kind of set it and forget it and crack on with the rest of the build and the rest of the area without having to constantly come back and try and fix things. So a bit of forward planning in that regard obviously will definitely help. Obviously, we're cracking on with the pedestrian and the bike networks here, and I really wanted it to be expansive. You will see come the end of the video, in fact, we don't get that much traffic on it. We get a reasonable amount of pedestrian, but we don't get too much bike. So in the next episode after this one, I'm going to try and induce a bit more traffic, and we're going to kind of mix and match a few extra different types of assets and get things moving and get a bit more life out here. Again, with this particular part of the build here, I'm just thinking about next episodes, not necessarily the next one, but perhaps the one after that or the one after that. And I just want to make sure that we have connectivity between, parcels of land and making sure people can get through. And it's really important because one, I would prefer them not to use their cars, and two, I'd prefer them not to use the highway if they don't have to. So not taking shortcuts, but simply just having connections from one sort of development area to the next. Now, what was interesting when I was having a look on Google Maps is that some industrial areas have extensive bike networks, like this one. Some of them, not so much, there's very little. So obviously, I wanted to try and use it as much as I can. It's a feature of the game, and I think it's a nice addition, and it certainly is going to give us a unique look. Now, I do still need to just connect those networks to the actual main island. I'm not going to do anything fancy there. That is going to be a whole development, a whole redevelopment, for another episode. But for now, we can at least get things connected and make sure people can come over here. So with that layout very much in place now, we are set and we can start putting down a few assets. Now I'm going to do something that I don't usually do. I'm really just going to lay out all of the different assets that I'm going to be using. Some of them will be repeated assets, and it's going to save me a little bit of time later on constantly going in to find it and trying to find the damn things. So I'm going to basically pick out really every larger warehouse that we have in the game. We've got the custom warehouse here by Elvis. That's the Korean warehouse. Going to use that as well. There's not much in the way of warehousing really, or big industrial buildings like this on the workshop yet. Hopefully some more will come, but for now we've got a pretty decent selection. We can mix and match them, and then we can also use these sort of anchor industries, the big signature buildings. Going to be using a number of these. We're going to have the car factory here, we're going to use the pharma building, and we're also going to be building the athletic wear factory. The athletic wear factory will use cotton, which is handy because I used a number of cotton farms, and I'm going to add a few more actually surrounding the development as well and make it look like a bit more of a natural fit to the surrounding environment. At this early stage of the build, I know that this junction will probably be one of the busiest ones that we have that isn't one of the main arterials going through. So what I'm going to do on this one here is really just give more turning lanes. I'm going to have multiple turning lanes, in fact, in every direction, and we'll probably add to it a little bit later on. Actually, I thought this was going to be enough, but as you'll see, it wasn't quite enough, especially when it was kind of rush hour. We had a fair bit of traffic coming through here, so a few more adjustments later on won't hurt us. Of course, it's really nice to recognise that early in the build. If you recognise it a little bit too late once you've put your buildings down, it might be a little bit more difficult, but it's early doors here, and I think we can cope just fine. Now, one thing that actually surprised me a little bit, in fact, when I was building this out, is that once we have everything up and running, you'll see that actually these big signature buildings, they don't generate very much traffic. So that was a little bit unexpected, and I have built these things obviously, in the past, but I didn't really notice just exactly how little traffic they actually produce. The much smaller, zonable industrial assets will tend to get a lot more going on, and certainly the storage ones certainly do as well, which you'll see. So again, here we're just going to be adding an extra few turning lanes, and hopefully things should run quite nicely once we have it up and running. I do want to make it look a little bit more natural and a little bit less tight on the corners there, so we'll just remove it with the manipulation mode, and we'll just kind of spread things out a little bit. So I think for that parcel of land, relatively happy with that. We still have a bit of development area there up against the highway, but I think the overall general layout, getting the big stuff in first, I think I'm happy enough with that section. So time to move on to the next one below it. So a little bit different down here, we're going to be using these static ploppable warehousing assets from the Bridges and Ports DLC. I'm going to use a little bit of an overlap on one side, and then across the road here, or across the courtyard on what will be the courtyard, I am just going to put down a single one. Very basic road network here. I'm going to cover the actual road network itself with surfaces a little bit later on, so it will look a bit better than it does just now. You will see that the recolouring work does make a bit of a difference as well. It's nice to see that they're all recolourable as well. Keep it nice and grey. Everything from a colour point of view is going to be very neutral, as you would expect in an industrial area, and I am going to line the insides of these buildings with little individual roads. Now if you look closely, you'll see that they are connecting. There's a little lamppost that will appear right there, and you know that they're good to go. Now for some of the regular viewers, you know where this is going. We're going to be using StarQ's ploppable industrial blocks, and of course that's going to generate tons of traffic, and each one of these little blocks represents a 1x2 industrial zonable asset. Now I did make a little bit of a mistake here. You see here that they are up against that road, and some of them were actually zoning and spawning vehicles, and they were coming out the back of the warehousing. So obviously that needed to be fixed, and it required a little bit of an adjustment to make sure that they were actually coming into the courtyard and coming in and following traffic the way that I want them to. I did think about having the bike networks just on one side of the highway, but thought better of it. I am going to have some rail coming in here as well, and the thought of them having to cross traffic twice, to get to a particular area didn't really make sense. So I wanted that extra one in there for a few more options and hopefully prevent a few issues later down the line. Now where the opportunity arises, I think it's important to try and diversify things a little bit. I do want to add a little bit of office. Now I don't have any demand, but the good news is once I plop this down, we got a company in there straight away. So perhaps that'll give us the opportunity to add a few different businesses here and there and just kind of break things up a little bit visually. And on that note, I'm going to use a couple of the smaller warehouses just here at the back. They're a nice fit and a little bit of off-street parking as well. I think generally in this industrial area, I'm going to keep most of the traffic off the roads if I can. So whether that's using highway or whether that's using, some of the road tools and just make maybe wide pavements, then I will. I'm not really going to be using too many on-street bike lanes. I didn't find too many of them on Google Maps, so I think it probably makes sense to leave them off. There were some really minor roads that I found with these ones on here as well, but they tended to be kind of matched in with some residential development as well, and that's not really what we're building out here today, at least anyway. The train station I used here, and I'm just making sure that it can connect to the road network as well, of course, is from Tygon's Rail Pack. I wanted something that's looking super basic, nothing fancy at all. Really wanted a kind of utilitarian almost look to it, and that little one was a perfect fit. Now, a little bit later on in the build, I reckon that we are going to be seeing a lot more traffic to that particular train station. We are going to have some residential out here, and it's probably going to go just to the right of what we're building, and I would imagine that it will probably get pretty busy. So we do have a bit of space reserved here, not a huge amount to be honest, but I think some bike parking, some actual car parking might be necessary as well. But for now, I'm just going to pop the bikes down and we're going to see what happens. With this big vanilla industry asset, I'm going to double it up here, more so it looks interesting from the top, but two, just so we can got something that's really, really big. Now, it wouldn't have made sense here with cars running through there, so I grabbed a little static ploppable, some random office asset, and we'll just make a little bit of a more realistic entrance, I guess, if we're going to have cars running along the side of the secondary asset. So we're moving on to our next development plot of land, and this is going to be our factory. It's going to be a tractor factory, in fact, and it's super simple. Same sort of idea as what you've seen previously. We're going to lay down our static ploppables. We're using the cargo warehouse. I'm not sure if this is from a train station or the vanilla cargo port. Could be either, I'll be honest with you. But same technique. Pick an asset, pick a location, get it facing the way you want it facing, get the road networks in there underneath, and then put the zonable blocks underneath it. I do worry about fire coverage out here as well. We'll be relying solely on helicopters coming from the main city or from the power station that's way off camera. So a little bit risky, I think, not having some coverage out here. So we're going to use the Dutch one, in fact, and that's got a helicopter built in as well, which is always welcome. Along here, we're going to have a little bit of a one-way system, and we're just going to put down some normal industrial storage, not messing about with any static ploppable here or anything like that. So get it recolored. I think that red looks a little bit out of place. Don't really see that when we're looking on Google Maps, so make it nice and grey and boring, and that should look the part. Directly behind that, we're going to have a bit of a distribution centre. This is going to be a DHL distribution centre, if I remember correctly, and across the road we are going to have FedEx. Assets are just identical, layout very, very similar, and I want to have these as almost competing businesses, so to speak. Now, following the road hierarchy that we've created on this build, what we're going to have running into these facilities is just a basic alley road. Don't think I need anything too fancy here. It's pretty much a dead end or a cul-de-sac, so I reckon having just a simple, smaller road kind of makes sense. Around the athletic wear factory, I'm just going to have a little bit of a one-way system and have plenty of parking on here as well. Directly around it, in this particular development parcel, we're going to use the Korean warehouses that we spoke about earlier on. Going to use a few of them really. They're a little bit too colourful, can't really recolour them too much, but we can take out the red, and I think having a little accent of the blue there, it doesn't look too bad at all. I am going to be using some of the EE office assets. They're beautiful. I love them. Super generic. I see them everywhere on Google Maps. It's one of my favourite assets, actually. Definitely my favourite office asset. And just taking a bulk it out and cover a little bit more area. I'm going to have some matching assets behind it. We're going to be using, again, it's just some random office asset. I don't know what it is, but we're going to be using the static ploppables and create a little bit of an extension around the back. So having that as a nice mix of completely functional and then extending it out with non-functional stuff works pretty well. So one important thing to note and to remember here is that although we're using warehousing assets and warehousing static ploppables, all of the zonable stuff in there is whatever the game needs, whatever the game is asking for. So it's very much demand led. So if we need oil industry or we need stone industry or whatever it is, then the game will basically spawn that and fulfill that demand. So when we have these storage assets and these warehousing assets up and running, you'll see quite a diverse a diverse range of traffic. And that's a nice contrast to just plopping assets that you want. So personally, if I was building industrial areas and I didn't have these blocks, then I would probably use an awful lot of warehousing assets, because that's, for me, is what most modern industry looks like. The problem with that though, of course, is that if you build a ton of warehousing and a ton of storage and the game doesn't have demand for it, then you're just going to end up with a ton of empty warehousing. So really, it's a godsend having these zonable blocks. It makes a huge difference to what we're trying to build here. Now, one thing I really want to see in the workshop is some industrial greenhouses. Netherlands has an absolute ton of these things. They're absolutely everywhere. And in fact, there's a whole number of things I would like on the workshop. I've got a bit of a wish list, and what I decided to do, in fact, was to try and make something myself. And I have to report back, it's not going particularly well. So, zero Blender experience, zero asset experience, but I thought I would at least give things a try. I thought maybe starting off small, do some little houseboats, little canal housing or whatnot might be an easier one to start with, and I guess I've got the overall shape done. I think the mapping and the texturing and all that kind of stuff is beyond my pay grade at this particular stage of the game, but I managed to get at least something in game. It is to scale, and yeah, I'm definitely not showing it here. I think it's definitely a work in progress. I guess it's just finding the time to really sit down and learn things and make sure that it's at a reasonable level. I think given that everything is absolutely brand new, it's taken me absolute forever just to kind of do the basics, There's plenty of tutorials online, in fairness, and the tutorials are all pretty good. They kind of make sense, but I guess it's just experience levels kind of making things super, super slow. I mean, it took me about 5 hours just to get the scale and the rotation right to actually bring it into the game. But that said, for the individual things that I really, really need to have in the city, it might be the way forward to get things in. So let's get the last of the buildings in place here, get the last of the blocks put in place and the last of the parking, and then we can start making this look a little bit better. So it's time to start personalising some of the buildings here. I'm not going to go too crazy here, but as I said earlier on, I want to have sort of competing businesses, and quite often these big logistics centres, you see they're clustered together in one area, and that's kind of what I'm trying to create here. So I'm going to use the DHL vehicles, new mod here by Atomics, and I'm also going to be using the billboards and poster pack, the shipping and cargo one by Harrison. Now on that first pack, it's with the DHL vehicles, it's actually going to spawn DHL vehicles that you'll see live in the game, scooting about the map. The second one I'm going to use with the billboards and poster packs, the reason I'm using that is that when you use the props for the DHL ones, they don't have the decals built in them, and as luck would have it, the decals from the billboards and poster packs fit perfectly directly onto these vehicles. It will of course take a bit of time. You've got to place the vehicles down and then you've got to go and hand place all of the decals, but totally worth it in my opinion, and it gives a nice unique look to this particular warehousing facility. So you can see how that fits into the wider development here. We've kind of started centrally, and really all it is a bit of surface work, popping down some buildings, a few decals, and then we'll fence the thing off so it's a nice secure facility. I'm not going to go too mad on ground decals. Really all I'm going to do is just add a little bit of texture and potentially towards the vehicles, the parked vehicles, and along the actual buildings themselves. It's one of them rabbit holes that once you start, you'll be there absolutely forever, and at the end of the day, I'm trying to get video out as well. But I think having this as a slightly cleaner development kind of gives the impression that it's potentially a newer development as well. It's not been there for decades, and it's very much a modern build. I started off with these darker assets, and I think they were maybe a little bit too much, so I ended up kind of replacing some of them, went a little bit lighter. As I said, I don't want to go too mad with it, and I would like to retain that slightly cleaner look than perhaps, historic industrial areas might find. Directly across the road we're going to make our DHL depot. Now I'm going to use that same pack with the decals to give the custom look to the actual vehicles themselves, and directly after making this video, Atomics has actually released another one, FedEx vehicles as well, so I'm going to be adding them 100% into the playlist. Love to see them kind of running about the city and doing their thing. Not sure about that big American cab right enough. Hopefully we get a European one in there. I don't know, I've not tried it yet, but we shall see. But I reckon just even having these in game or having them as an option is a huge thing, and you might notice in the city that some of the trucks are looking pretty colourful. The reason for that is that I'm using this mod by Eagle Dragon. It will give you a ton more assets to choose from if you want to use them as props, but they will change the containers that you find on the back of trucks as well. So nice little addition to that one, and very welcome to put that one in the city. So back to our FedEx Centre, and I think it deserves a little bit of a headquarter building there as well. So again, just a nice office asset. I do like that one as well. We'll give it a bit of parking around the back, make it nice and secure with a bit of fencing, and then we can add some detail and a few trees and surface work a little bit later on. Now, I've said many times before, I'm pretty much done with custom parking. It does my head in. However, it's a real nice addition when we've got an awkward spot, and it's a nice little filler there beside our distribution HQ. Again, we'll get some of the decals here, and what I'm doing for the ground around here is that I'm just going to be using one or two surfaces here just to give us a little bit of a lighter effect. We're going to contrast that with some darker vegetation, so we're going to use a little green bush and we're going to use some oaks, and there's going to be very little variation from that. We will be using the usual apple trees as well, and that just gives us that lighter look, but really nothing too fancy. I'm going to use a kind of uniform palette, and I'm going to try and stick to really the same surface throughout the build itself, and we'll probably extend that palette, that combination right the way through the city. I think keeping it simple helps. I don't need to go looking for 1,000,001 assets, and it just makes things that much quicker to build. I reckon having a few set assets for the job and then hand placing them, one by one, means that even though you're repeating the asset multiple times, you're still getting a unique feel for each particular part of your detailing. One thing I will say is that although I am adding a reasonable bit of farming actually within this build itself, it's going to fill all the awkward gaps, and it's going to create that sort of more realistic padding, if you like, for the development. You'll often see more times than not that these big industrial areas do have an awful lot of farming land that are going to be surrounding it. And I spoke a little bit about that in the last episode when we created the big polder, is that I think I am going to fill the map but fill it with some real sort of, not low effort, but what's the word? Lower fidelity farmland, I guess, you know. Create stuff that's a little bit bigger, a lot less detailed, and it will act as a background or a border, you know, out towards the edge of the map. But where we have that land butted up against development, I'm going to spend a little bit of extra time and at least give it a nice look when we're focused in and zoomed in on the build. I think for this big factory it deserves a little bit of extra attention, and we're just going to chuck in a couple of different trees there, really just to break it up visually. So we spoke earlier about some bikes, and I wanted to have everything obviously, you know, connected up. Part of that of course is providing the parking as well. I really do want to over provide parking here and make sure that we have maximum bikes. I want to obviously have that as a Dutch build, but I do want to have it as a bit of an additional traffic challenge for myself as I'm building out the city. Now I might come back one day and rue that decision, but I'm going to stick with it for now and we can see how we get on. Now over in the data center here that we've created, I'm just going to swap out the surfaces. That's pretty much it. It takes up a large amount of area, and the detailing point of view, there's really not much to do, to be honest with you. So swap out the surfaces and that's a nice easy section to get done quickly. For the tractor factory, just a case of chucking props down, pretty straightforward. We'll get it fenced off so it's nice and secure, and we've got a few different assets that we can have there, which again creates a little bit of visual interest. From a branding point of view, Jeremy Clarkson would be proud. This is going to be a Lamborghini tractor factory. Happy days, thank you very much, I'll take that. Around the back of that big factory, we're just going to add a little bit of vegetation. There's really not much else we can do here. It's on a bit of a slope as well, so it's probably not going to take any decals, but pretty straightforward. We'll go very, very easy on it, and we'll come back and we'll add some surfaces on that to break up the ground effect a little bit as well. I'm going to skip through most of the agricultural stuff that we're using here to, you know, fill the gaps. There's really not too much to cover, there's certainly nothing new, but one thing I will be doing is adding a few of these ditches. I'm not going to go too mad, they're really pretty much a token gesture more than anything else, but they are going to help us break up the actual farmland in the fields, just like we saw, you know, again in the previous episode. So from time to time you will see me chuck in a few decals. I want to go easy on them, more so that I can just avoid it looking too repetitive, but in a few different areas where we've got a bit of dirt ground, it absolutely makes sense to, you know, chuck it in there, and again just adds a little bit of difference, you know, to the rest of the build area itself. So having a look, I think everything is going pretty fine. We've got a bit more to do here, which we'll obviously crack on with just now. The containers are going to come in pretty handy as well over in our big warehousing towards the water. Again, we're going to skip through a lot of this stuff because you've kind of seen most of the techniques and most of the props already. So there's a fair bit of repetition in this build, which I'll spare you guys, but I do want to give you at least an idea of what we're doing with each of the parcels of land. Although some of it is fairly similar, again, we want to try and make it look a little bit unique and make it look a little bit different. So we're going to rip out all of the lighting that came in there. It looked odd, obviously, having these big lights in the middle of nowhere, and we want to kind of keep them to the actual road themselves. So we'll replace them with the commercial ones. In terms of prop work, super simple. We'll just use the line tool. Don't tend to use the line tool too much, but obviously in this sort of scenario where we've got boxes and containers and whatnot, then it absolutely makes sense to do so. Now obviously you can make it a little bit messier if you want, and you can do that within the line tool itself. You just put in the correct option, but here I'm just going to keep everything nice and compact and straight. Now, for a few of these warehouses, I do want to give them particular materials. Here I'm going to be making this something of a lumberyard, I guess. We can kind of imagine it might be a paper factory or something like that. I'm not quite sure if these assets, these wood assets, are actually from a mod or whether it's base game props. I know that we used to have piles that were base game and then they were available as a local asset, and now I don't have a clue if they're on PDX or if they're on vanilla. So if anybody knows, put it down in the comments so people can get an answer on that one. But nonetheless, really the purpose of this build is really to create a big warehousing and distribution and logistics centre more than anything else. That's kind of what I want it looking like. That said, having a few different props and a few different sort of use cases and land uses and building uses does kind of break things up and makes it look a little bit more interesting. I thought here I'd actually let these things zone in, and I just was curious to see what demand was being filled. So here you can see that it's pretty much storage, you know, we have stone or ore, oil storage there as well, and then we've got a bit of manufacturing too. So yeah, just out of curiosity, I thought I'd see what demand is asking for. So after adding a bit of extra farmland here and filling that gap the way I want it filled, I thought I'd add a bit of livestock. Unfortunately, they are floating. These assets are really nice actually, super detailed. But yeah, I think to fix that, I think you have to put down the area, don't you? And then kind of pin them in with the area tool, but I'll come back to that. I'll try and get that fixed. I don't want floating livestock about the place, it's a little bit weird. So the same idea as the paper factory, you know, where we put down the wood piles and the wood props. I'm going to add a few raw materials to the warehousing over on this side as well. I'm also going to add some of these decals. Now, we don't have a port here where you would expect marked, you know, to be, but we will be adding that at some point later down the line. But it's a pretty nice prop to add, and again, it gives an extra little bit of realism. Not going to go too wild with the decals here, but the darker ones obviously make sense to have it on the darker props. And across the road or across the roundabout there where we have the double warehousing, we're going to use a little bit lighter and just kind of match things up from a material point of view. There was that little parcel of development land up butted against the highway and behind that big signature building, so we do need to work on that a little bit. I thought about maybe just filling it in with trees and a bit of vegetation, but I thought, you know what, it might be a little bit of a waste, so I thought I'd just get some normal assets down here, create something of a combined big unit and just repeat it. And there on the corner we're going to add one of the big petrol stations. Now there's a real lack of petrol stations and I kind of talked about it here, but one thing I was really surprised is that this came in as a BP petrol station, so I think that is StarQ's real world petrochemical mod. I could be completely wrong on that, but it was a real surprise that it came in like that. Happy days, lovely little effect. So let's take a look at the finished product. I think what I'd like to do is give you guys an overview of the city as well while we're at it. We'll do a quick scan over. You can see that we've got plenty of work still to be done in our big financial and our office district there at the south of the city. But coming over across, having a look at the farmland and the industrial, you can kind of see how everything fits together. I've got a fair bit of work to do on that big sort of star-shaped island that are going to be in between the two development areas. You guys have given me plenty of ideas in the comments, so by all means keep them coming, and I think we'll probably combine quite a number of them once we get onto that particular part of the build. It is a little bit difficult, but there are a few more boat props kicking about, and that's going to make things a little bit easier for me. So plenty of work went in this one. I think having that extra agriculture there, filling the gaps in between the networks, the road, the rail, and the industry itself actually makes quite a significant difference. Quite satisfying really seeing everything come together. But that's it for me, guys. Take care. I'll see you in the next one.